Hi, this is Jonathan J, and welcome to one of my behind the scenes podcast interviews. Now, the interview today is with Jonathan Goldstein, and Jonathan is one of my private clients. And over the last year that we've worked together, he's bought several businesses, notably one out of administration. Now, in this interview, you'll discover the huge benefits of buying that business to his existing business, why he did it, how he structured the deal, and how he made it happen. How are you, Jonathan?
Very well indeed. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. What have you been up to recently? It feels like a very long time since I spoke to you last.
There's been this little thing called a pandemic that's kind of driven away.
Absolutely. It was definitely pre-pandemic that I spoke to you.
That's right. That's right. Um, Busy as hell as always, I think, is a safe way of putting it. I think just after we spoke, or around the last time we spoke, I bought the assets of a software company out of administration.
Yes.
Since then,
we definitely talked about that.
I went through and did that, and then we've been developing that platform ever since. And it's been very useful because that's actually, it's like all things, you don't quite know what you've got until you've got it. I often think about this as in terms of analogies, like buying a second-hand car. You can read the specs, you can kick the tires, but until you start driving the thing away, you don't really learn about all the ups and downs you get with it. So it's actually, there's obviously more work than you can ever believe possible on it, but actually the potential is immense. And we're doing a lot of strategic work at the moment because as an organization, we just incrementally grow, and that's great. And there's obviously, as you know, I've done a couple of acquisitions to obviously ramp that up. But what's really great in terms of our overall strategy is when we're looking at construction as a whole life cycle, if you think about it as a circle from the project's inception all the way through to completion, and all the different touch points that contractors and clients and everyone, manufacturers get involved in as part of this circle, what we've bought out of administration forms actually a missing gap in our capabilities that no one else.
Interesting.
So when you start to look at the medium-term vision of what we're actually looking to build, and what we're working on is the concept of connected construction, because construction has a massive issue with productivity. You can count it in literally billions globally. I mean, hundreds of billions. It's that large. And since mainly the 70s, you've got other industries and other trades generally that have gradually improved their productivity. And construction, by and large, as compared to others, has generally remained quite flat. And what we're looking to do is to say, well, instead of being an organization that solves problems very well, is how can we effectively, we're asking ourselves the question, how can we actually fill just a small part of that productivity gap? And actually Goldstein, which is Goldstein.io, that's the platform that we acquired out of administration, goes a long way along with our other software platforms. Connecting those together in a story, a joined up story, actually will go a long way to doing that. And certainly the kind of conversations we're having with existing clients who want to be part of that development cycle are you get comments like, well, that's fantastic. Of course, we want to help you with this, because that's exactly the kind of thing we've been asking for years. Does this kind of stuff even exist? Well, what we're trying to do is create exactly those benefits for people. And that all comes out of the back of an acquisition. And it's like a lot of things as well, is that out the back of an acquisition, I've also landed an amazing CTO, which I wouldn't have
very good.
otherwise.
Very good.
And he's helped with other sides of our business. So there's always that crossover, cross-pollination, multiplier effect that we've really benefited from. Out the back of that, we've hired a couple of other developers who have taken our capabilities in-house through the roof on our existing offerings. So I can't remember exactly which meeting it was, but you always get the crossover, don't you? You always get,
yes.
This is why I like masterminds generally, because you think of your own problems within your industry and how to solve them. And you look at other people's industries and how they tackle things, and you go, well, that could work for me. And it's the same within companies as well. And that's been remarkable. Honestly, Jonathan, without a shadow of a doubt, I've said this many times to quite a few people. I've said, even if nothing comes out of, even if we financially do not benefit from Goldstein.io as a platform in its own right, it doesn't matter. It's actually paid for itself multiple times over before we've even started to monetize the actual assets we bought. So yeah,
That's a good position to be in, isn't it? Because it gives you just more confidence for the future when you know that you've got your investment back already.
there's certain investments I've made outside of uh, the mastermind, which has been content that has not been core to your program, but it's areas we've covered. In particular, I'm thinking around personal guarantees. And there's been a lot of people that have made investments in my network. Some of them we know quite closely. And they've made investments in certain hotel groups and things like this, which of course have really gone through the mill recently with the pandemic. And it's things that I've known that you've reminded me of, and I know you've done that through the masterminds. Like, for example, there is no such thing as a register of personal guarantees.
Hmm.
In other words, they're relatively meaningless. I could be worth, let's say, 10 million and give 30 million pounds worth of guarantees out. So when I've lent out significant capital, I've always made sure that I've got a charge, like a
Yeah.
first charge.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I've got quite a lot of money loaned into a hotel group at the moment. They are really struggling for the obvious reasons. A lot of people will lose a lot of money on that. But I've got senior
So
lending.
you have a charge over the company that owns the property.
I've got a charge. Yes, well, it's and the whole structure is you've got, like all these things, you've got, the holding company, and then each hotel is owned in different SPV companies, and
Okay.
I've got a charge over the asset. So one of the hotels I've got a first charge on,
Good.
which is quite comforting. I mean, nothing's perfect, but once again, it's these kind of things that come out of the mastermind that I was just thinking about the other day in relation to this call, which have been invaluable.
That's fantastic. So with the business that you or the software asset that you bought from the company in administration, how did you find out about that?
It was one of the portals, I think IPBid actually.
Yeah.
And normally I keep a relatively close eye on that. And I've always got certain alerts set up for specific keywords and specific industries. Now I'm quite selective over what I'm looking for. And it doesn't do the best job of alerting me to the relevant ones. Because, for example, if I put in there intellectual property, or you could be selling a factory and there's intellectual property,
Yeah,
the
sure.
description will pop up. But
Yeah,
every
it's
so
not
often,
very sophisticated, is it? So you got to dig through a lot to find the one that you want.
but there's little overhead because you click on the link, you just see is it relevant, and either it's yes or no, request a
Yeah.
pack, and off you go. But I suppose what I've learned about it is look, I'm very busy with my core businesses, so I'm always looking for complementary or bolt-on businesses. They're very much in the software field, and thankfully, software's got great margins, so they don't tend to go out of business unless they are one of these, high-intensity startups which burn through capital and can't get the next round of funding, which is effectively what happened to Baystone. So with that acquisition, I effectively picked up millions of pounds worth of development in software that's related to my field of construction, and that's why it's so complementary.
Yes.
I've looked at and been very close to acquiring other software companies in film and media, but I've always felt that it's more of a distraction from my core,
Hmm.
and therefore, what's the opportunity cost with that? And
It's
not in,
easy to be distracted, isn't it? So
it
I
is.
think having that strategic approach, knowing exactly where you're going, working the steps out to get there, and knowing when you've got there as well.
That's right.
Starting with the end in mind is really important.
It is, and that's what's great about the mastermind, because it does give you exactly those steps that are very different from buying a profitable company compared to one that's in distress versus one that's in administration or insolvency completely. Um, and I think what's also incredibly important is that you don't get caught offside with a lot of these things, because you're going to ask, especially if you're doing it for the first time, you're going to people to verify whether you're serious or not will ask you certain questions, and you're expected to know what you're talking about. And if
Yes.
you don't have that knowledge, if you've not understood, if you haven't covered off either in masterminds or other formats, whatever it be, exactly what the different mechanics are of buying, let's say, a company or assets out of an administrator, if you're not talking their language, they're never going to consider you. They're just going to consider you as many of the time wasters that are out there.
Yeah, you sound like an amateur. You need to come across as a professional, which is why the more you know, the more terminology you've got up your sleeve, and just the more you understand it, the better it is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think someone a lot smarter than us said something at one point saying knowledge is power. It's
Something
forever
like this.
true.
Absolutely. So you found that's how you found out about it. What was the period of time between finding out about the opportunity to actually owning the business, the software business?
That's a very good question. It was a matter of weeks.
Sure.
Because with all these opportunities, they're not looking to run the company that's in trouble. They're looking to,
Yeah.
in theory, realize the best outcome for all the creditors. So as soon as these things happen, NDA's out, within 24 hours, return to them. The information packs were almost immediate as well. So probably within 48 hours, all that had already been achieved. And then what I like to do is to literally get, as soon as possible, get as much information about the company, not really from the agent who's handling the case, but actually from the people in the organization. So I set up a call. Once again, within a day or two, I had a call. The agent was on the call, and the CTO and the CEO of Baystone. We were all on a call together. And of course, I was just trying to get the story of the company. How did you get to this point? Effectively, what went wrong? Where were you going? And just trying to understand, just trying to fill the gaps in, because obviously you come into it at a very precise point. And of
Yes.
course, nothing just happens, things like this don't turn on a dime. There's obviously a huge amount of decisions and story that goes up to this point. So I'm trying to understand the story to get to the point of where we are now, to then understand, is there a path to profit? Does this deserve the focus and attention? Is this a project I want to be involved in? And you have to really decide that very quickly. And of course, with these things, you don't necessarily pay much money for them. Effectively, you're paying the administrator's fees and the agent's fees, and
Absolutely. Yes.
absolutely. Then beyond that, you don't need to, especially when you're dealing with intangible assets. Because of course, like with all these things, they say, well, look, there's been X million of pounds worth of investment that's gone into this IP. So therefore we think you should be paying hundreds of thousands of pounds for this IP. And aren't you lucky to be paying hundreds of thousands of pounds for this IP? Because it's actually cost millions. Of course, my argument is it's intangible. It has no resale value, because if it was that valuable, there'd be a business in front of it that's making lots of money. So therefore, it's only worth something to the right people. And frankly, from my point of view, it isn't worth that much, because I need to do a lot of work to it. So my argument is I'm not too sure if I want to go ahead with this, because in all seriousness, it might just be better for me to start again from scratch to build these capabilities out. So why would I buy them? Now, that's not always quite, as you know, it's not always quite true, but it certainly makes it very easy to bring down their rather inflated valuations on what the IP is. So you go through those kind of things, of course. You get the backstory as quickly as possible. You set a price that's very much in line with what their fees are. And of course, you're pointed out quite sternly, there are no warranties at all, no guarantees. And the whole thing's done on an invoice. So it's actually relatively simple once you know what you're doing, like all things in life.
Absolutely.
And it was a very short turnaround. I think I found out about it in something like late April, and I think roughly speaking by early May we'd signed, sealed, and delivered on it.
Fantastic. And what was it that had gone wrong with the company?
It's interesting that, like all these things, it was a series of things. So they were going through rounds of funding, and they're quite often with these kind of tech companies, they obviously were burning a huge amount of cash, needing to raise money consistently. And to prove their worth to investors, they were going what I call elephant hunting. They were going for the largest of all contracts. So, for example, Baystone has been with the largest contractors in the UK. It's been on projects like Crossrail. It's proved its worth. But going for those very large contracts, it can take 18 months to win one of those contracts. And there aren't that many of them around. So yes, they're very profitable when they come, but there's these gaps that occur. So for example, what happened was that it was two things that really came together. Firstly, a couple of large projects got delayed. Like for example, one of those was HS2, which created this huge gap. And they hadn't gone for the next round of funding, because what had also been happening previously was that they were looking to be bought out. And even though heads of terms were signed, everything was negotiated, it was payday, they're all happy, at the very last minute, the buyer pulled out. So they were caught in this
Yeah.
perfect.
So no funding and no exit.
Yeah, basically, and they'd run out of cash, and there was no way they were going to be able to sustain the business model they had, and there was no way they were going to find one of these large contracts quick enough to fill the gap as well, and so they had no choice. And it was quite an emotional call, when you're on with the ex-CEO and CTO, because they'd literally, they'd sacrifice their own worth in terms of, what they could get was at least double if they were working as consultants, which they are now. And yeah, they'd put literally blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, and of course, it's all come to pretty much nothing.
But you rescued some jobs. You rescued the project.
Very much the project, and yes, I have hired the CTO works for us on a retainer basis. Doing a number of days every month, regardless, and that can ebb and flow. And even with the CEO, we've actually. He does work for us on a project basis as well, and we have hired ourselves internally off the back of that. So yeah, we've definitely retained value. There's no question about that.
Very
so
good.
I'm happy from that point of view.
Well done. And so since then, what has happened? What else has happened, if anything, on the acquisition front?
We are currently in talks with a very interesting company that deals with, I know it's quite cliche at the moment, but it's to do with misting and fogging. Now, it's not that business actually that we're quite interested in. It's the fact that they've got a distribution agreement with a supplier that does an organic as opposed to a hydrogen peroxide mist. So you've actually got a naturally occurring plant-based solution that kills coronavirus, which is quite unique.
Okay.
So that's actually what we're looking to buy the business over. The problem with the business is that it's been run as a lifestyle business. It's one person. There's no second-tier management. It's very much run very ad hoc. And the guy that runs it wouldn't be the easiest in terms of knowledge transfer. And due to his age and his personal circumstances, would disappear rather quickly. So we're trying to mitigate the key man risk with this, to whether or not we actually push the button on it at all. But we're literally in due diligence, so we're literally just scratching beneath the surface at the moment on that.
And is it a business or is it an invention?
That's a very good question. It's a business that sits in front of the invention of this particular solution, because that's one of the things that we don't like about the business. It doesn't own the IP.
Okay.
So we are actually reliant upon this 5-year distribution agreement, and yes, it's got exclusivity. So therefore, we are looking at this as, is this just a 5-year project, because there's no guarantees of any extension.
Absolutely.
So on the surface, it seems like a no-brainer. We've had some conversations, and the applications are immense. As you can imagine, anywhere that people are, and they're worried about coronavirus in particular, but just generally viruses. So it could be, it's vets, it's your shopping. It's actually got certification to actually pump into buildings. It's actually inhalation proof. I mean, the food and beverage industry, the applications are immense. The issue is everything else around that is a bit flaky. So once again, it's whether or not we decide to push the button on it.
So the extension of the license agreement, I would say, is key to whether you go ahead, and maybe you can negotiate that extension with the licensor so that you extend it as part of the deal.
Yeah, we've already made direct contact with him in his company, and he seems very keen. But like all these things, until it's in black and white, you don't really know. But he's certainly keen to support us. But there's the other people that have exclusivity in the facilities management field is Mighty, who are absolutely enormous. So I can definitely see them trying to cut across. And of course, they've got certainly in the food and beverage space, they could argue that that falls within their remit as well. So who's buying more solution? Certainly not us at the moment. So they've got all the bargaining power if it comes to that. So there's a lot of variables around it. But I often come back to, I'm not a serial acquirer of businesses, and I don't particularly want to be at this stage. I'm very excited about the core, and I use acquisition to bolster the core proposition.
Mm-hmm.
It could be interesting to see if one day that flips on its head. So when I look at these opportunities, I think what's great is that I understand where they are, where they can be found. I understand the methodology about different types, profitable, distressed, etc. The language, the process, etc., which I can thank you very much for in the first place. But it's not, it's the opportunity cost, because you have to have your eyes wide open. And I think I'm very grateful because I've got a profitable platform which affords me the space to be able to even look at these opportunities
Yes.
in the first place. But even with that in place, like I said, I'm very selective. I don't want a project that may be quite profitable in its own right, but the opportunity cost being actually, if I'd have focused more on the core business, I'd have done better. And
Yeah.
so I'm always weighing that up all the time when I look at these opportunities.
Yeah, that sounds like a very sensible approach. So, for someone who's listening to this podcast who has clearly they have an interest in acquisitions, otherwise they wouldn't be listening to the podcast. What would you say to that person who's sitting on the fence? They're not sure if it's the right thing to do. They haven't quite taken the leap yet. I mean, what would you say based upon your time with me? I think we've known each other maybe for 2 years now.
Yes, it is. It'll just be just over 2 years. And even before the mastermind, I made sure I read your book as well. And there was an immense amount of value packed into that book. And I've given that book to some other people, and they've been very interested in talking to me about the mastermind as well. So I'd say to people, if you're sitting on the fence, you genuinely have to ask yourself the question. You can't stay there forever. Which side of the fence are you on? Because like all things, there's always the fear of the unknown. So either you want to get educated and you want to get serious about it, in which case, push the button now. What's the point in delaying? Because actually, everyone thinks about things in terms of money, but time is also, if not more important than money.
Time has a value, absolutely.
And one of my favorite expressions is that wealth is condensed time. We can't get time back. So ask yourself the question, am I serious about this, yes or no? Because unless you must be able to answer yes to that question. And if you can answer yes to that question, just get on and do it. Because regret is a terrible thing. And no matter how much or how little you end up using the knowledge and advice you get, it will be invaluable to you in ways that you cannot predict at this stage. So just get on and do it. I don't regret it at all.
Yeah, that's great advice, Jonathan. Yeah, very good. So what does the future hold for you and your companies?
So we're actually asking ourselves that question at the moment. So we are doing, we're working with the ex-director of strategy at one of the manufacturers in our industry, who's about 2 billion a year. So he's very well placed in the corporate world to help us with strategy. So we're literally going through this exact exercise. And we're looking at how we can, well, I alluded to earlier, how we can fill the productivity gap that exists in our industry. We're looking at creating loyalty clubs, for example, whereby we supplement and augment the core value proposition that we have with related services that in themselves are so powerful that you'd have our core offering just to get the benefits of the club membership. And once again, that kind of strategy around the core, then because of the knowledge of the mastermind, opens up more avenues to build that loyalty program. Because, for example, what if we want to, and we do, by the way, what if we want to add more value to our client base in wealth management? Well, then one way of doing that, of course, is to partner with a wealth manager. Another way is to acquire a wealth management firm. Now, I would never have that option if I hadn't been on the journey with yourself. So you never, just going back to what I was saying before, you never really know what the true advantages are of doing a mastermind like this until you do it, because it just opens your eyes to more possibilities in ways you could never predict. And that's invaluable. So
yeah, if you're by yourself, you only have one view of the world. You only have one set of experiences. In a room with a group of people who are equally as forward thinking and ambitious, then suddenly you multiply up the experiences, you multiply up the amount of advice and sounding boards that you can bounce ideas off of. So
you only know what you know. And they say a wise man is a man who knows, that he doesn't know everything. So, you'd be very arrogant to think you know it all, and that's a very dangerous position to come from. So you have to be in a room. Generally speaking, I think you need to be in a room with people that are, if not equal to you, but certainly ahead of you, because that will just simply bring your performance and your game up and your knowledge up. And that's what masterminds do. They raise the game, they raise the bar. And of course, there's accountability as well, because as you get to know people that are on a similar journey to you as well, you start to create networks, you start to liaise, you actually find other partners to do these things with as well, to share the responsibility, to broaden the knowledge, to bring more to the party, to increase the chances of success. And you become accountable to those people and your wider group. And that means you're more likely to action things as well when you are being held accountable. And that's what a mastermind does. It provides accountability.
Fantastic. And it's been really good catching up with you. It's been way too long. We shouldn't leave it another 12 months before the next conversation. So Jonathan Goldstein, thank you very much. And we will catch up on a future podcast episode. Thank you.
Take care, Jonathan. All the best. Thanks. Bye-bye.